I've been posting on Instagram and Facebook, different socials for, at least a decade now.
Mm.
And the growth has always been slow. And so, I'm really have been relying more on local things to keep this whole operation going.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, I did that portrait of that cat and it just exploded. And I was in shock. And, for like 4 days straight, I was just sitting there looking at my Instagram, wondering when it was going to slow down because it just felt like out of control almost, which I'm super grateful for. But I think a lot of artists could relate that it's almost frustrating, you
Mm.
know, because it has been a decade of
Yeah.
consistent posting, and I couldn't tell you what made that post specifically so special. I don't know. I wish I could identify it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it just went out of control.
When
And
did you
every
notice it?
post,
Sorry, I
huh?
didn't mean to interrupt you. When did you notice that it was blowing up? Did you post it and then an hour or so later check and say, those are good numbers, and then refresh it and it's, increase? Or how did it hit you?
Yeah, it was pretty immediate. I I posted it, and I want to say, once I usually post something on Instagram, and then I'll continue to scroll through a little bit and
Mm.
just kind of look for interesting stuff. Um, and before I even had closed out the app, I noticed that it was going fast.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started responding to some comments, and then I put it away and said, let me not sit here and obsess about this. I'll just let it sit. And I want to say I checked it like 3 or 4 hours later,
Yeah.
and it had already surpassed even my most successful posts I'd ever made. And yeah, it just kept on going.
I think what I realised after a while is that my favourite bit of the painting is painting the face. And so I have to kind of stop myself from doing that first and then, not wanting to do the rest. So, I have to almost like encourage myself to do lots of the background and lots of the other bits first. And then, then I can enjoy doing the face. So that's what led me on to doing these. I did a couple of these paintings of big group scenes of like scouts and cubs, like loads and loads of them, all these little faces to paint. So I was really happy with that. And I was just thinking about this painting earlier. This is quite a new one, but I was just thinking I could paint family groups of people sitting on sofas all day, every day. I really love it. It's just all these kind of relationships that you can get into, and relationships between figures and color relationships and pattern coming in and out. So yeah, I love group scenes, really, really do. But I've done lots of single and couples as well. I seem to have painted quite a lot of. Well, I mean, I did all these ones of scouts, and then I've done quite a few recently of kind of guys in their swimming trunks, standing around pools. I've done quite a lot of those, and I've got lots of ideas. I've got lots of ideas of how to go forward. I even started experimenting with like AI because I thought, okay, I know what I want, and I'm searching for it all the time. I'm just trying to search for these kind of things, and it's very hard to find the things that you want sometimes. So I was like, well, I wonder if I can tell AI to generate these things for me and see how that is. So I have actually made a few AI images which I think are all right, but I'm not quite sure yet. The jury's out yet about whether they're worth pursuing or not, but it's an interesting new idea that I've got. If I know I like women in boats, and I've like mined the internet for pictures of vintage women in boats, I've got them all. But so now I need AI to make me some new ones.
Yeah.
So that I'm sort of experimenting with that a little bit and seeing if that's a good idea or not. Not sure.
I hear you completely about, to go to art school versus not. There's
Yeah.
pros and cons to both, absolutely. And there's no perfect art school either, I don't believe. So although mine sounds idyllic and wonderful, from the little bit that I've shared, heavily rooted in observation, but there was a real house style, and it was based on you and Uglow's approach, that highly rigorous, highly measured, observed, which is amazing. And some people will say, oh, it's sterile and cold. Personally, I'd say it's controlled passion. And I know other artists did. And, the critics of you and Uglow that really championed what he was doing, they say that as well. I think it's a big thing they say, it's controlled passion. But my art schools, especially Canterbury, it's quite crushing in a good way. And I keep saying that, but I do mean it. I think you had to kind of fight against the house style. You're kind of soaking it up, but you got to be careful not to lose your soul to it. And there was a couple of times when I was just putting these dots on the paper, and then it became almost like dot to dot, with the measuring and the plumb lines. And in fact, the blooming life school, the life room was like walking into a spider's web. You get tangled in the plumb lines. It was insane. But it was an incredible place to study, absolutely. And again, the tutors were just second to none. But obviously, if you're going to teach, you've got to have some kind of system. It's, real systems to kind of get people through and understand. And so you've got to kind of break things down. And so when you're going through that learning, you can't not look like what they're doing, because, but then it's what you do with it afterwards. It's just a tool. A technique is just a tool. And it's how you process it. It's how you perceive the world. And it's how it comes out of your hand that makes it yours. So, you could paint in a manner that Monet does, but because of how you perceive and your choices of color and your experiences throughout your life, that's going to make the work yours, regardless of whether you're dabbing it on like Monet. It's still you, isn't it? So after art school, I remember, in fact, after the second year, I went home for the summer back to Doncaster, still living at home with my parents. And I had a bedroom that looked over Conisbrough Castle, the castle that Ivanhoe is based on, Sir Walter Scott, I believe, and then viaducts, allotments, just incredible view. It's hardly surprising that I wanted to take the route that I did. Just seeing that every day, opening the curtains, like bang, just different weather, just amazing. But that second summer at home, I realized that, man, I've got this incredible tool, but it's useless if I don't make it mine or apply it to me and drop the things that don't apply to me. So that's what I did. I just worked for the whole holidays, just up in that bedroom or outside in the local disused quarry, local landscape, just painting in isolation, really, just loving it, learning to be by myself, which is so important. And then I went back in the third year, and I don't know, something happened. I was using what they taught me, but I was me again. So I'd gone through this big circle, and I'd soaked up all the good stuff along the way and arrived back where I started, but better, hopefully.
Maybe somebody's listening to this and they're like, well, no, I am the typical artist, and actually there's no such thing. I just catch myself on that one, but I am an artist through and through, and I'm creative. I'm kind of flaky, head in the clouds and all of that. And I think everybody that's creative has that tendency for the most part. But I think if that's you, and there's nothing wrong with that, if that's kind of the direction that you're going in, that's your personality, cool, rock that. But I think that there are other aspects to that business that if you have the opportunity to, you could team up with somebody else. Maybe there's a great word, it's delegation. If you're able to take those tasks that maybe aren't your strong suit, but are the strong suit of somebody else, maybe if that's their wheelhouse, hand those tasks over to them. And maybe you can work something out where you enter into that partnership. It could even be some of your other artist buddies. It's like, hey, you know what? Michael's great with numbers. Sally's fantastic at organizing events. We could put this together. Maybe we can have a group collaborative effort here. And maybe we can all wear the hats amongst us. I'm great at coming up with the visions and the grand idea and then getting to work in my studio, and you find that maybe you could do that. And I came across this. This was put so well in a book by Michael Gerber called The E-Myth. And he talks about the way that most businesses start. And there's a shocking statistic out there about most businesses failing, most small businesses failing within the first year. It's something like, if I remember the statistic, pull up the statistics anyway, but I think it's well over 50%. Most are gone within, most are gone within the first 5 years. Only less than 10% make it past that first decade. Less than 10%. So to run a business actually requires a lot. And it's not just artists that struggle with this. Everybody struggles with this. So Michael Gerber talks about there's 3 basic personality types that you have in any kind of business venture. You have the technician, the entrepreneur, and the manager. Now, Tony Robbins has got a very similar kind of formula. He's got the artist, which is probably really appropriate for us, the entrepreneur, and the manager. What ends up happening, and if you listen to Michael's book or you read it, is the technician has what's called an entrepreneurial seizure. And then they spend the rest of the time mismanaging the business, and then it ends up in the can at the end of that. And they end up having to go and get another job to pay down that line of credit that they borrowed to start this thing in the first place. So what needs to happen is we need a level of awareness about what our strengths and weaknesses are. We've either got to skill up in those areas that are lacking or team up with other people that can help us in those areas. Now, I'm blessed. I married the right woman. She's got a head for numbers and she's great at organizing finances. Don't ask me to look at numbers, charts, and figures. Like we've hired a digital marketing agency. They run some of our social media ads. I'm looking at the readout and I'm like, guys, explain this to me. You're going to have to tell me because I can't math. I won't do it. I can't do it. I look at it. I'm just like, okay, explain what this is. They're like, this month we did great. I'm like, great. See you next month kind of thing. I just need somebody to really dumb it down for me because that's just not my jam. You want to talk about painting, man, I'll talk your ear off. You want to talk about maybe a new business idea or something like that. I'm all about it. So I seem to straddle that territory between the technician entrepreneur. In terms of the manager, I can manage myself pretty well. I got that discipline down. I can set a schedule and I can stick to it. I can structure my time. I'm focused. That's the other thing that was really important for me is finding that deep work focused flow state and staying there. I'm also good at getting myself to do things I don't want to do. I do it anyway. So there's a few things and these weren't necessarily always with me. They weren't skills that I always had, but I've had to develop them. And now I can summon them pretty much at will. But a big thing I will say was finding the right help when I needed it. Now, if you're an artist and you want to do that moody, broody kind of artist thing and just kind of chill out in your studio, fine, that's great. Anybody listening to that, if that's their headspace, that's great. Maybe the model that's best for some of those artists is maybe the gallery model would be great because they got the business and they're running it. And they can represent you. So now it's going to be up to you to do your artist thing, create your best work and present a really slick body of work of the highest quality you can muster to that gallery if you want to go for that model. Otherwise, if you want to run this thing yourself, I would recommend teaming up with some others who would share in that vision, but maybe come with a different skill set. I know this right now. Don't get into the trap of thinking you need somebody else like you. If I found somebody else to work in this business that was just like me, I would have gone bust long ago. Like this would not work. I need people who aren't like me, who have unique skills and talents and abilities and are much smarter than me and much more capable than me in other areas. I'm not going to ask them to paint pictures, and they're not going to ask me to run the numbers. So it's important that we have that. I just want to throw in one more thing here because I think it's been particularly important for me. We all have a different relationship with this. I understand. When I was training really hard this year, and I will get back to it soon, again, with some of those health challenges, I haven't been able to train for the last few months. But when I was training really hard, that actually helped me develop that discipline to be able to do that. So if I didn't feel like it, well, guess what? We're doing it anyway. So I'd show up every day and I'd get my workout. I used to train in the evenings, but I then realized that I had more energy and I was set up for the day and I was in a better state of mind if I did it first thing in the morning. So I would do that really early, get that workout out of the way. My body's full of those endorphins. But the thing, it was such an important physical metaphor. It's like, okay, I can see the deadlift bar has got that sitting on it. I've got to lift that thing. I've got to lift it 10 times and we got to do it for 5 sets or whatever I was doing that day. And then after that workout, I'd be like, that was really hard. That sucked. If I can do that, what else can I do? More importantly, if I can get myself to do that thing, that unpleasant thing, then writing that email is not so hard. Creating this newsletter is not so hard. Sitting in this meeting and trying to find a new strategy for whatever, when I'd much rather be painting, that's not that difficult because I did that. That was really unpleasant. That hurt, try and do it properly with training and supervision. That's fine. But, it's physically unpleasant to put yourself through those paces. But here's the thing, the more you do that, you physically get stronger and more capable. But the more you exercise that discipline, just like a muscle, you're capable of more as a result of doing that. And I don't think, everybody throws discipline out like it's just this little throwaway line. Oh, it takes discipline. Yeah, but what is that? What does that actually look like? And I think it's important for us artists to be able to, whether we feel like it or not, get ourselves in that position where we can sit down and just do the work, just get it done, whether it's art or something for our business. So for me, the exercise has been quite beneficial and as a way of being able to tap into other areas of my life and channel that quality. So just something else I want to throw in the mix there.
I think I'm really drawn to more tonal paintings, but I can't get myself to become a complete tonalist. So a few things like observation. So nature is always more muted than what you think it is. Like even the blue like you see this ocean that's vibrant blue, it's not going to be out of the tube blue. I remember one time a teacher showed me, I had painted this like really dark ultramarine blue for my ocean, and I was wearing a blue jacket, and he picked my sleeve and he said, "Look, this is really blue and that is not." So, it's all about comparison. So that's like, you look at something really bright and saturated, and if you put it up next to nature, you're not going to find those pure pigments out there. So part of the reason I grade things down is because of that. And sometimes I see sometimes certain artists, they will intentionally grade their paintings even more than what you see. So sometimes I will experiment with that just to see if I can pull it off. Sometimes I try, not very often, but sometimes I'll try some palettes which are even more limited, like just one red, yellow, and blue, and they may not be my usual ones. They may be something different. Sometimes I'll try the Zon palette. So it just depends. So it depends on the palette choice. So sometimes the goal is to try and so the goal is always to try and replicate the relationships that you see and not exactly copy everything just as you see it. So I'm always trying to, like, if you paint with intention, sometimes you can decide a color scheme or some sort of dominant color for your painting, and then you can push everything. The decisions are made based on that as well as observation. So you have to decide sometimes. So sometimes you might see a really bright saturated green out there, like a spring green, but you can choose to not paint it that bright, depending on where it is in your painting and how it fits into your painting. So observation as well as intention will decide the colors that end up in the painting.
I think it's inevitable over time to be cautious, but as long as it feels like play at some point, it has to get to that point of risk taking is one way to describe it, but that sounds a bit serious. But it's more just I wonder if what would happen if I did that. And I probably my outlet for a lot of that is in ground preparation, cleaning a palette and just applying that to surfaces that are lying around, and then gradually altering those colors over time. That's probably where I enjoy paint. There's a purity to that messing about, Richard. It's just pushing it around and then letting it be, which is very different to the struggle of representation, especially when it gets like I was painting grapes for a sort of anxious 45 minutes earlier today, and the grapes are red grapes, but they're the greenest red grapes you've ever seen. So the color shifts are it's almost like you look at the grape and it's red, you look away, you look back and it's green, and it's that kind of craziness. But as long as you're absorbed, it's absorption and attentiveness is the aim, and that's the process which leads to a feeling of being connected in some way. The image is always there, isn't it? You paint and run out of energy, and then if you're lucky, there's something to look at. You put it on the wall, and when you run out of energy, you can still see. It might not be the best time to look at something, but it's that idea of a bit of consolation in the activity. That's rewarding, but maybe that's a bit optimistic, because it's a lot of the time it doesn't work, and it feels quite discouraging painting.
Yep, very much so. Very much so.
No, the good thing about a class is that you get a bit of buoyancy and momentum with being around the other people doing it.
Yeah.
So.
This is something I kind of worry about, and I'm still not quite sure how to approach as a teacher, because if you start saying that it's just a reference, or even if nature or a photograph or whatever is just a reference, and then what the main thing is the painting, then there starts to be a certain amount of like if you're giving a critique, they might just say, well, I liked it better that way. Or, you might be critiquing something about, the proportions, or which that's totally, that's a thing that, I mean, I kind of get that. And, at a certain point, you want people to, I mean, I would imagine, people can take whatever liberties they want. But the thing about having a model there and critiquing a person's painting, like while the model is there, is that there's a degree of objectivity, even though, I can't say for sure that you and I see exactly the same thing, or that the exact colors, that I see are the ones you'll see. But there's a degree of objectivity, I think, that allows you to have a conversation, at least, about, what you're seeing and what's accurate. What does that even mean, accuracy? But one thing I remember, getting a critique from Israel, and he mentioned, I don't know if he said the word truth, or he was talking about a particular color notes I'd mixed that were true notes that ring true. They look like really observed, just and believable in that regard, and before they become anything else, that you have 3 or 4 spots of color that they just read like a light effect, and it could be a landscape, it could be a figure, it could be a still life. And I remember that idea was something I kind of latched onto, and even at Tony's, I feel like that was a certain overlap that those two had, is that to have that kind of as a foundation, that kind of ability, to just make a few notes read as light on a flat surface, has, like, that's sort of become fundamental to what I'm trying to do. So before it becomes anything else, whatever nameable thing it is, that you're able and then, I mean, it's a tall order, to actually mix those colors, and get the value structure and everything right, and to make it say way more, with just a few of spots. But I think that's probably the most valuable skill that a painter or painter working sort of perceptually or observational would want to have.
Imagine living in a walled city, however large the city is. Every so often, you come to the outer wall and you're aware that suddenly the road stops here. And I think we all encounter the shape and size of the city wall in our knowledge. We don't always necessarily admit it to ourselves, but we do know when we come to that place and say, I actually don't know. In other words, I'm sometimes talking about things, about a subject, and it's fluff. It's unfounded. So I wonder what lies on the other side of that wall, but I'm too lazy, frankly, to find out. So I kind of started cutting holes in the city wall and extending the streets by reading and studying. And for example, we went to all the top galleries in New York. We made a trip, 2 months, 2 or 3 months actually, studying the galleries in New York, talking to dealers, looking really carefully at what they're showing and why they're showing and what's going on, and abstraction, Franz Klein, Robert Motherwell, Hans Hofmann, talking to the people that represent the estates of those artists. And then we did the same thing in Chicago and Aspen, Colorado, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and so on. And I'd done a similar thing in New Orleans, Louisiana previously, and so you learn. And the thing is, the learning is not just facts. It's not facts and information. I think facts and information are the very poor cousins of real learning. That's like saying, because I know your name, I know you. Your name is just information. So I can't pretend I know you because I know your name, Simon. And knowing the word color, and knowing red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, means you know a fact. That's all. So from then on, you've got to cut a hole in the city wall and extend the streets and begin to open it up and look at Vuillard and Bonnard and Gauguin and, all the early colorists, and begin to open it up and build, yeah. I think that's it.
That's incredible. Thank you. Yeah.
It's really fascinating. Isn't it fun? Something I taught my sons was that I have very unusual beliefs about education. So I never allowed them to do homework. That was one thing. Because I think kids have had enough by the time they come home. It's enough. They do about 35 hours in school. Anyone that does a 35-hour job, any adult that does that has had enough. They need to rest and play now, So I believe that. But I also used to, if they got, say, 100% or whatever it was in a test, I used to say, oh, okay. And, show no interest at all. And if they failed at something, I used to kind of rub my hands and say, oh, how interesting. I wonder what it was that confounded you about that thing. Let's have a look. And so what I taught them was that failing is the best thing you can do. bad marks are just such a blessing because it means there's still some juice in it. What's left? What didn't we get about that? This is really fascinating. So let's look at that. And then they noticed that, you know, when they got good marks, I was just bored because there's no juice left in it. Okay, great. You know, and so therefore learning and education is completely unconnected to your value as a human being, whether you're good or bad, your value, all of that. There is no connection whatsoever between those two subjects. So I literally obliterated that connection. And so they grew up absolutely loving knowledge and feeling no connection. You see, the truth about it all is that in this universe, you and I know one speck between us of knowledge in an infinite amount of awareness of which we are both completely ignorant. We'll never overcome our ignorance in this life or in any other life. We'll never, you know. So we have to be okay with it.
I agree. I think the best we can hope for is to know enough to know that we don't know very much, really.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We're all just at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Never leave that place. You know, the starter's block in a race, we're still standing on it.
I feel like I'm a little bit at a transitional point for myself right now. Yeah, I have worked with galleries in the past. So I've had a few kind of more long-term gallery relationships. That I guess when I say that, I mean, I've worked with galleries in the past where I've given them work and they've, you know, hung it in their galleries and it's been there for a longer period of time. But I've also done a lot of things with galleries where I've done shows that they'll have and things like that, but it's not necessarily a long-term relationship. I have always felt, I've always tried, I guess, to put my work out there in a variety of different ways. So I've kind of from the beginning had a little bit of that online presence. And I think that was really beneficial for me because I think a lot of other artists have the opposite trajectory where they kind of get involved in their local art scene first. And then they branch out, and then they kind of think, how can I branch out? You know, how can I find a wider audience? And for me, for whatever reason, it was almost the opposite, where I had kind of this online audience, people that were finding my work via Etsy, my website. I had a blog back in the blogging days. And I had people that were kind of I was connecting with through those avenues, but they obviously were not local to me. You know, these people were even some of them overseas, a lot of people just around the country here. And that was exciting to me. And it also just felt like that's what all the artists were doing. But I came to find out that wasn't necessarily true. And I thought, I need to like tap into what's going on around me here, because I was shipping paintings, you know, and that has still stayed the main source, I guess, of my income as an artist is not through local avenues necessarily. So, but I started doing, you know, I did like a couple years in a row, or a few years in a row, I did like street festivals. So I had a tent, I had the whole outdoor setup thing. You know, this was in the early days with my art. That is such a hustle. It is so much work. And I admire artists that continue to have that to be like a major part of their business structure, their business model, because that's a lot of work. Hauling your paintings back and forth, you know, but I loved that I took all those opportunities because it gave me connections to people that I wouldn't have otherwise found. And that also connected me to the first galleries that I worked with, because some of those gallery directors and managers would be going around to some of those kinds of shows and they would meet you and things like that. And I was always trying to put my work into juried shows, to see if I was, you know, just to kind of have that peer review a little bit of your work, to feel, I guess that's always been important to me, to have to not just put my work out into the world and be like, I love it, so I don't care what other people think of it. I mean, I guess it would be dishonest for me to say that I don't care what other people think about my work. I feel like it's a huge honor to feel that I have not just the approval, but like the admiration of my peers, you know, my artistic peers. That is a huge, that is a big amount of fulfillment for me as an artist, to feel that. And so I've always had that attempt to put my work into different juried shows, whether they're local or national juried shows and things like that. And I've had various, you know, levels of success with that over the years. You know, sometimes you get a painting in a show and most times you don't, you know, but those were good experiences for me. And then to go to those show openings. So I've had those kinds of relationships with galleries over the years. The long-term relationships that I've had, I mean, I don't want to speak negatively about anyone in particular, but they haven't always felt extremely beneficial, on the one hand. And I don't know if that's because I had kind of built up an audience and a collector base of my own. And so I felt that, I guess for me at this stage, I would love to find opportunities to have my work in a gallery or anywhere, you know, where it's going to gain a wider audience than maybe what I feel like I could garnish on my own, you know? So yeah, that's kind of like where I feel like I'm at now. And I feel really fortunate and really grateful for the platforms that I've been able to find success. Mostly Instagram has been a really big game changer for my business model, I guess. I mean, it kind of accidentally happened that way. I got on Instagram, I want to say like 2016, something like that. And I had kind of always heard about Instagram on the side, you know, but I never really knew much about it. And I was just anti-social media generally. And I've been this way about all the new technology. I refused to get a digital camera for like 5 years. My husband's like, just get a digital camera. Finally, I get a digital camera. And then I would just badmouth the thing. Cause I'm like, now I have so many pictures that I never print out, you know, and that's stayed true. And then it's like every little technology has been the same. And I was totally boycotting all the social media, but I had another friend that had gotten on Instagram, and was just talking about how great it was for visual artists. And I thought, oh, I wonder if that's a good place for me to try to post about some of my work. Cause I'd done Pinterest a little bit and things like that. So I started with Instagram, and I guess the rest is history. I don't know. Yes. It became quite engrossing, you know, for me, but and it's like, I don't have like a hate relationship. It's not like a love-hate relationship fully, but it's a little fraught. It's a wonderful tool, but it's really hard to feel like you're in control of that tool. So sometimes you feel like it's just controlling you.
I understand.
Big balance there. So that's just kind of, I don't know. I just feel like in the beginning, I was taking every opportunity that came my way. And I feel like that was really good for me. And that's advice I would probably give to a lot of artists. Take all the opportunities, you know, do all the different shows, do the outdoor shows, do the juried shows, you know, go on Instagram, do it all. But I think I'm sort of at a point where I feel like I need to make more deliberate decisions about the direction that I'm going to go. So I don't know what those decisions are going to be necessarily at this stage, but kind of in that transition period.
So here, these are my primaries, my yellow, red, and blue. But then I use the iridium green as a bending color, as a cooling color. Because the Midwest where we live, that's all you have. In the summer, starting in the spring all the way to the beginning of the fall, that's all you get, greens, greens, and greens. So knowing how to properly paint them is hugely important, because my greens start diminishing in chroma with the distance and also in value. Now, you have to, as an artist, exaggerate a bit because you are doing a painting, not a photograph. So yes, and then I also use ivory black as a bending color to kill the chroma a little bit. Sometimes you get colors that are just too unnatural. So being able to use your grays throughout the painting is hugely important because it creates atmosphere.
So I always say that I'm in the current status of redefining a little bit what I'm doing, because I've recently, not super recently, but in the last 2 years, I've really learned to appreciate and explore a variety of materials differently. And a lot of that, actually, it was thanks to COVID, because I had no access to materials. Where I was living, I only had a brocante, which is like a flea market, and I was able to buy old paper and old fabrics and things, but I had no gesso. I learned how to make gesso, which was a disaster. I had no paints. I had to buy paints at the HOUR supermarket, like children's school paints. I couldn't get anything. I had no access to materials for almost a year. So I was continuing to paint and to work, but with whatever I could find. And it was actually really brilliant. It sort of awoke something in me that really resonated with all of my background. Is like, I was a set designer for many years, so I really like making things and creating, like, the place around me is just as important as what is what I'm creating in it. And so I started experimenting with all these different materials. So now I would say, I mean, I'm experimenting with sculpture quite a lot recently. So I'm an abstract artist. I'm not trying to represent anything. I'm not trying to depict a thought or a feeling necessarily. It's just very intuitive. So it's coming from a place that is like, it's almost like I'm like having a conversation. It's sort of question and answer with myself, really, but without thinking about it. If that's a good way to describe it. I work a lot with color. I do also, I actually worked in black and white for many, many years. I loved working with black and white, and I still do, but I feel that color resonates much more with me, and I have a pretty symbiotic relationship with, like, tonalities of colors, and I feel like it tells a more interesting story. A lot of people can be slightly terrified of color, and if you get it wrong, they're right that they should be terrified of it, because it can be really bad. But I take a lot of pride in the fact that I know colors very well. And so I like to sort of make this dialogue really evident on canvas, on paper, in sculpture, made with mark making and shapes, and the relationship between and how these forms connect and communicate with each other. But it's funny, I was like, actually, I feel like I'm like an abstract folk artist. And the folk part comes in with the relationship to materials, because I am like a little scavenger when it comes to finding old pieces of paper. And like my next exhibition in Paris in September, most of the work is coming from an antique crate. Well, a crate. It's a basket that was covered in fabric and then covered in leather, and then had all these like leather straps bolted to it, which when I moved from France kind of fell apart and got squished in the moving truck, sadly. And so I have been dissecting this thing like a doctor, like a surgeon, and taking all of its parts, including its sort of disintegrating cardboard that was underneath the linen that is now woven around the basket, like, and the leather straps and everything. And I'm recreating the surface that I'm painting on with some of these pieces of material, including also like the lining of a chaise longue that I made a fabric and covered it in this. And when we were covering it, there was this checkered fabric that was like a ticking, like, lining of the chaise longue, and I've stretched it over a wooden frame, and I'm using it as my canvas, because I feel like the found material is much more exciting than the roll of canvas and linen that you can buy from the art store. Like, I find it so boring now; it just doesn't really do anything for me. So, for me, there's the treasure hunt of the thing that has a story already, and then extending that story and making it into something else. So that's my new terminology: abstract folk.
I think it's almost like you have to learn the rules first for painting, and that aerial perspective, like you mentioned about things getting bluer in the distance. There's those are the things, those sort of set of rules that you kind of have to learn first, and you then start noticing them. And once you start noticing, you can't stop that. So I suppose it's like, you know, if you've got a 3D subject in front of you and you're wanting to create it on a 2D surface to make it look 3D. So you need to see that the colours obviously are paler in the distance. All the lines are softer, the details have gone. So when you have something right at the front of your picture, it needs to be a nice strong warm colour, and the edges are stronger, and that kind of works as well with still life, even though your subject's right in front of you. To make it into a 3D object, you still have to use that, you know, all the atmospheric things that happen within a picture. It's, I don't know when you start picking that up, or I think it's just time, isn't it? Do they say that to get something good, it's 10,000 hours worth of work? And I paint and draw every single day without fail. I get a bit, according to my husband, I get a bit twitchy if I haven't done any artwork that day. Yeah.
Let's say you painted something and then you gonna add like and see does it work or not, but you're not sure. With acrylic you have wonderful possibility to have a damp towel and paint over something, and if you don't like, you can immediately wipe it down immediately without destroying anything. You cannot make that trick with gouache. Once you lay down paint, you can overpaint, but you cannot erase it immediately.
Yes.
Yeah, it does dry quick on a palette. It depends on environment. It really does dry quick in a plein air painting. That's why I did plein air with acrylic, just to test out thing, but it's really, really hard. It's like everything dries fast and you just fast to squeeze new paint because everything dried. Your palette dried, your paint you squeezed, and some people do open acrylics. But then, like, I was thinking about that, like, okay, if I want like to paint to dry not that fast, I better to, you know, paint with oils, and they're fantastic for that. So I like acrylic. You can use different technique of like blending. Some people say, oh, they don't blend well. They don't, I mean, then they wet, but they are good when you dry brush them. So you paint it, and then like with dry brushing, you can really smooth it out, but it's not like you do it in oil. Or you can do that in oil, but you have to wait between drying. So I like it. I think I didn't like them at first. At my first 5 times, I just really hated them. Just like, what a pain, what I can do with that. But then I got myself like a month to paint exclusively with acrylics, just to get used to them, just to find out how to work with them. And I think it's a crucial time for people to give them a chance and work it out, not to say, oh, they work, you know, with oil. And then door is closed. So, but I'm trying to, you know, have more doors open, as I like get a call from the gallery and they say, okay, your painting is sold, bring new one tomorrow. Yes. With oil, you just can't do that because you need at least 1 week, and then with oil, yeah, you can bring them, like depending on size, you can bring them next day or day after. Yeah, it'll be fine.
I was working mostly in acrylic. I had done this really large body of work. I mean, like 48 by 60 or 72 inches of these really large jazz pieces with like jazz musicians, and completely different. And then when we moved into this place out in the woods, we're outside of the town, and we live on 5 acres. It's just me and my husband. I had a cat, but it died, and now I have a billion birds, and there's a hawk out there trying to eat my birds right now, but squirrels, raccoons, everything, deer. We've had porcupines, I mean, we've had a black bear run through the field. But anyway, I've got all this inspiration. I can walk out my front door, and I'm so grateful. I've never lived in the woods before, so I didn't, and it was just I'm so grateful. It is a spiritual experience, honestly, being here and being able to walk outside. And while I'm mostly a studio painter, and it's in my garage, so I can open my studios in my garage. I can open my garage door and look at the Glen, which is the painting I just showed you. I've painted that scene so many times in so many conditions and seasons, and with flowers or in a horizontal or a portrait, way of painting, that I don't think I'll ever get tired of it. And the sun sets to the west over there. And so I always, unless it's cloudy, as it often is here, but even then we have this beauty of the mistiness of the light coming through. And it's just, it is a never ending quest, I guess, to paint it. I have this desire to just see the light through the trees. It's just something. See, it's funny that you say that you think it's difficult to paint that, because to me, I was talking to a friend of mine. Her name's Jerry Greenberg. She's she's a pastel artist, and she does still life and portraits. And I think that that's incredibly difficult. I mean, I've tried both, and I do occasionally try my hand at those because I don't want to get bored. And I do think it's also important to challenge ourselves, and her and I were talking, and she said, and she does these beautiful, beautiful, vibrant, full of life, still lifes. And she said, well, oh God, it's so easy to do those, but it's so hard to paint those trees. And I said, I'm laughing. I'm like, all you have to do is just squiggle a bunch of pastel on there and then just work around it until it turns into a blob that looks like a tree. And she said, no, that's what you do with a still life.
Yeah.
Thought, no. So it's so funny that I think that what we love, what we are focused on, is what we're best at.
It's tempting when you're painting or you're drawing you look at objects and you see they have an outline around them, and you draw, a line around it. And the brain is such that, you're sort of drawn to edges. You want to distinguish between things. That's how we see the world. But if you paint everything with a very sharp edge on it, it actually doesn't look real. It, especially with a round object, like let's say you're painting, I don't know, a stone that has a round edge. If you paint it with a very sharp edge, it almost looks like a cutout, like an oval that someone pasted on a painting. If you have a softer edge, it implies that the form continues beyond what you're actually seeing. So that's one kind of soft edge. Another would be if you're painting something in a shadow, you can't see details. If something's well lit, you can see details. If it's in the shadow, you can't. So if I paint something that's in a shadow, I'll make a very fuzzy edge on it. So you can't, because it wouldn't be like real vision if you painted a very sharp edge on something. And the other, and also if there's something illuminated very brightly, like I painted a vase, a circular vase with a highlight right on the rim of the vase, and where the highlight hit, you could see that the light was radiating out. You know how highlights sort of, they glow. And if you paint a very soft edge at a highlight, that communicates that there's this light there. Whereas if you drew a very hard edge, it wouldn't look like light actually flowing out from that point. If an object has a sharp edge, like a cube, I would tend to draw a more definite line. And all this variation on edges really makes a difference in how you look at a painting. For one, it's variety, which is always nice. And the other is that it really communicates form. And that was much more than I was able to say on a 20-second reel. So thank you.
So the landscape, for want of a better term, or the horizon, is I kind of usually go for about the quarter or the golden mean ratio. So there's the horizon, and then it just goes up into the sky.
Yeah.
There's different orientations, whether you want to go landscape, portrait. The couple behind me are on canvas and they're portrait.
Yes.
I've gone for a square format as well. Square, you might think, would squash things up, but for me, it kind of pushes me a little bit more into how can I get across this idea of scale, the bigness, the vastness of the sky. And often the landscapes, they do go a bit dark at the bottom there, but that's again, we're going back to the fence. I mean, that's what I remember. That's that peat-rich soil, But I mean, it's easier on paper to just change, just to go back to the process. So if something's not working, sometimes those landscapes will become a seascape, and vice versa. It just has to be the way it goes, But with canvas, it's a lot more controlled, I'm going to say. I have to be much more thoughtful about what I'm doing. It takes longer as well. So it has to dry out a little bit before I can go back to it. It's still alla prima, but it's not as quick.
I'll be looking at things going, oh, I know I can sell that. But my heart has to also really love it. I can't have things here I don't, even though it could sell brilliantly, I won't have it unless I believe in it, and I would like to own it myself. Not saying every piece of art I want to own, but on the whole, that particular artist has to, I have to crave after it or feel that I understand it. And but it's interesting because it's not just the artworks, it's the person. I have to be able to, I'm representing this person. I've got to deal with them. That's true. And some artists I have very different relationships with all of my artists. Some are really close friends, others aren't so much, but that's the relationship we have. All equally is valid. But it's the types of paintings I love, or sculptures or artworks. There's no sort of limit as long as I understand it, and I understand why the artist does it, and I can get behind it, and I want to own it myself. That's how I tend to view paintings. I'm very emotional. That tends to override the head. That's much, you should have this person because they're going to sell. I can't always take it, unfortunately, because I think I would make more money. I have some artists that don't sell huge amounts, but they're so good. And you've got to give them wall space. You've got to promote them, haven't you? And I'm luckily, I do have quite an eclectic taste, and I have quite a commercial taste naturally. So if I tend to like it on the whole, it does sell. Which is a bonus.
Puddles are great because they're very shallow. They don't get they're very low down. They don't get disturbed by the wind sometimes. Very often, unlike normal water on a river or canal, or certainly the sea. But these are flat, so they tend to be a mirror image. And if they're underneath a shady tree, then they're really dark, and sometimes nearly as dark as the shadow of the tree, the dark. So, and the lights, obviously, the light of the sky is really light. But one thing that I always say about, Ken Howard says about painting reflections in anything, any water, is the darks are always lighter and the lights are always darker. Yes. So, general rule, that is the case, but I have seen some of these puddle shadows. The darks in the puddle shadow are sometimes as dark as the actual top bit. I don't know why, but they are. One final thing to say on what I just said about rules and things. Samuel Johnson said the golden rule is that there's no golden rule. And I thought about that.
Absolutely.
That's why I don't believe in necessarily in teaching. I think inspiration and influence is very effective. It has been for me. I've taken it from the people who I liked, who I admired a lot.
Yes.
On just someone who could teach art.
Yeah, there have been a few occasions where I felt uncomfortable. I don't know if this is because I'm female, but I've been in a few situations where I felt a bit trapped by a guy, and just thinking, does somebody know where I am? And I suppose when I was thinking about that for the book, I was like, I think that's important to make sure that someone does know where you're going, because you are vulnerable when you're out there, and not everyone is lovely, and I think someone might take advantage. I certainly think that's true, that people take advantage of the fact that you can't go anywhere because you're set up and you're painting, and that and that's not with people sort of looking to cause you harm necessarily, but people know you can't go anywhere, so they just talk at you and at you, and then you don't quite know how to get rid of them. So talk about that in the book too.
So what's the name of the app? Because we'll put it up so that people who are watching the video can see.
It's called What 3 Words? And I think it's really gained traction sort of globally, but it'll every 3-meter radius square on the planet, well, land masses anyway, has got this unique 3-word code. And if you go on the app and you say where you are, it'll give you the 3 words, and then you can share that and people will be able to find you. I think it's genius.
If I could go back in time to myself as a college student, I would be like, take some business classes. Gosh, that would have been helpful. Take a business class, take a web design class. But other than that, I say I'm a bad teacher, but I do teach pretty often, not in the past year because baby jail, but before that I was getting into teaching more and more. And the thing that I keep coming across is people that want to start painting, but they feel like they need all of the information first. And I get that. They want to read all of the books, they want to buy all of the supplies. And then they do one painting and then they're like, well, this isn't working for me. I must need to buy more things, or I need to buy more classes, or I need to buy. And the answer is no, just take what you have already and just sit down and just do the painting. Just do the painting. And then if that one's not working, do another one, and then do another one and another one and another one.
Yeah.
Because you're not worse. You're only going to get better. And probably all the questions that you have, not all the questions, probably a good number of questions that you have doing that first painting, you will probably find the answer to yourself once you start painting more.
I have a sketchbook that I keep. I've been through several. I don't always finish them, but most of the time. I feel it's pretty fundamental because it's this kind of, like, at least for me, it's this kind of space where I can just be like unlimited. So like it's not, there's like no pressure. So like if I scribble up an entire page of my sketchbook and it turns like pitch black because I just have a bunch of charcoal on it, it's fine. I mean, nobody's gonna like judge me for that or call it bad art or whatever, you know. It's not something that I'm like presenting as a like fully finished painting or anything, but it gives me that freedom, that sort of childlike playfulness to just like do whatever, and then through that, like flipping through the sketchbook, I kind of like see this evolution of feelings and states of mind just sort of flowing, and that kind of gives me an idea, like inspiration or something, and I'll be like, okay, these pages are like really dark and moody, and like I'll throw some poetry in there sometimes, and just maybe sometimes random scribbles, and it all sort of creates a mood, and that really helps me to like come up with things, because it's not just like a visual inspiration. Like a lot of times I'll look outside and see a beautiful cloud and I'll be like, okay, I'll take a picture of that for later because I could include it in some painting or something. But seeing as what I do is not only about representation, you know, like visual, descriptive representation. I also feel like I need a sort of mood or an idea to back it up. So like maybe a storm painting, I'll have some pictures of storm clouds saved, or I'll have some sketches of storm clouds done from life, and like I sort of put all these things together. Maybe I'll have like jotted down a bunch of like poems or random phrases, or you know, stuff like that, and it just all sort of comes together, and I'm like, okay, I can make a painting or two or three out of that mood, out of that state of mind. And it's just very freeing, because like, I mean, I'll have, sometimes there's just like absolutely ridiculous stuff in there. Like I was flipping through my sketchbook the other day, and there was this one page where in the corner I had written down, big news, I'm happy, and the date, and that's it. So it's like, you know, it's very freeing. So I feel it's fundamental. And so some people like to have a very organized sketchbook, and I'm all for that. It's just never really been my style. I like to get messy and just sort of do a bunch of random stuff in my sketchbook.
I will, if I've got a pretty extreme idea for a painting, for an oil painting or whatever type of painting, a traditional painting, if I like the painting and then I get that big idea, and then I don't really want to take that huge risk. I don't know. It's tough saying that because I always want to take a risk, but it's so easy for me to just like, here's my easel and then here's my computer. So I'll come over here really quick and just try it in Photoshop.
Yeah.
And then when I do that, I'm like, okay, well, what happens if I do this? And what happens if I do this? I'll make new layers. And then once I like something, I don't know, 90% of the time I'll just use that as the new reference and change the actual painting. But other times because it's so fresh, I'll do that idea and I'll like it, but then I usually have to, I don't know, I'll send it to my brother, or I'll send it to CW, or I've got a couple other groups of painters that I'll send images to and just say, okay, what do you think of this? Is this, am I just in love with it because it's new, or do you think I should make these changes? So yeah, that's always just another tool that I have that's available, and I'm open to using it whenever possible. But yeah, like the big thing I think for me with Photoshop lately is using it to create, like I'll find an image online, or I'll find one of my reference photos, and then I'll mess with it in Photoshop until it starts to look like a painting. I'll mess with edges or change values or whatever, and I'll turn it into my own reference, and then I'll paint it. That I think is some of the biggest, or one of the biggest helps to me, is being able to do that.
If I know what I'm going to paint and the thought of it gives me that little buzz, that feeling, invariably the outcome is going to reflect that. If I feel very indifferent to something that I feel duty bound to paint, then it's hard for that to be anything other than just a response to that feeling, really. Yeah, there are things that I get excited about painting and things that I do not get excited about painting. And I take your point about commissions. Even with the best will in the world, even if you really get on with a person who you're painting, it's still you do have agency over it to a certain degree. It's still not your choice. It's still not your vision and what you would automatically paint, unless by some quirk of fate that person is exactly what it is. It's like, wow,
alignment.
Yeah, just total alignment, which just, let's be honest, doesn't really happen very often.
No.
What I choose to paint in terms of portraits, in terms of the non-commissioned stuff, is quite specific. It's generally a little bit challenging and irregular and not what society would consider to be pretty or good looking. You know, that irregularity for me is one of the things that I find exciting. I can see it. You know, I can see a person as a painting. I can't say what it's going to look like as the painting because I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I just feel it. I'm like, wow, that is something that somebody that just, needs to be painted. And I think I can do that. Whereas conversely, something else is just like, wow, your face is very regular. Or, you know.
I started painting in 2013. Seriously, that was my first solo exhibition that I had in central London. And it so happened that, you know, being a family man, I just had my children, well, my first daughter. And it was like, I used to work full time as a jewelry designer. So I studied architecture and then I studied jewelry design, product designing. And I happened to end up doing jewelry designing job here in London. That was my kind of a job that I was doing. Enjoying it, you know, having good time, but I always wanted to paint. So in 2013, I thought, you know, my wife actually gifted me a canvas and brushes. I mean, she always knew I painted. So she said, why don't you paint now that, you know, you will be spending a lot of time with your girls around here. So, you know, you can do that. So I started doing just random pictures. Like I used to do a lot of these roosters, you know, just splash of colors and stuff like that. So I've just kind of warming up myself, like freeing up, you know. And then somebody saw that and said, oh, would you like to do a portrait for me? So I then thought, well, why not? Then I did one portrait, then two portraits. And before I knew, I was doing a lot of portraitures, you know. So I tended to call myself a portrait artist then I had my two exhibitions after that, solo exhibitions in Mayfair. And then I went to New York on a family holiday. And I ended up going to all the museums, right from Guggenheim to a Metropolitan, you know, the museum. Then I went to Raleigh in North Carolina. And oh my God, the stuff that I saw there in all the museums. I mean, you have a National Gallery here, but I had to go to America to, you know, find myself, you know, my inner self. And the stuff that I saw, that I came back so rejuvenated that I wanted to just paint. And that's how I started doing landscapes, more and more looking at all the Impressionist work. I was so I'm thrilled with what I was seeing. And then the lockdown happened. And when the lockdown happened, it was like, no, you're not allowed to go out. You know, you got to sit inside and paint. And I was like, you know, the little rebel inside me, the subtleness, you know, I wanted to go out and paint. And I said to my wife, and, you know, I'm going out and painting. I'm allowed to go alone. You know, I'll be in the wild somewhere. And that's how I started doing en plein air, you know. And since then, I was like, the bug was bitten, you know, and I couldn't stop myself. I had been painting every day, 3-4 paintings, like, you know, like just like from a factory outlet, you know, just going on and on and on. And, you know, that's the story that kind of tells like how I ended up doing landscapes. So it has been quite like a transition in this aspect as well.
I saw some painters who did who work in this style. I begin to make plein air, I think, in 2015. Oh my God, I'm sorry. 2015 year. Yeah, it's right. Correct. Yes. I remember. So I did icon painting. I did gild and restoring. I make some art, but never did plein air. I saw some painters, they make plein air in group on fresh air, and I really was so excited of them, of their lifestyle, of their paintings. Really, in that moment I remember I thought I want to be so rich to buy their paintings. They because classical art, it's beautiful, it's nice, it's calm, it's okay for me, I like it. But this impressionistic energy, it's like a big fresh wave, and you just see this art colors, this fresh air on the picture, and I thought in that moment that I want all of it.
Yeah.
The paintings that I make, I develop over time, and there's kind of these layers of paint that builds up, and they get these kind of crusty surfaces where you can see layers of what happened before, the kind of process that went into it. And I didn't want this to feel like a mural where it's just kind of done smoothly in one go, on the side of I love giant murals, but maybe I would like to do one of those at some point. But I really wanted this to have the same painting quality that my other has, and that involves just like giving myself enough time to kind of really just be in the painting process and rework it a lot, and make a lot of changes, and through that the painting ends up having this kind of more I think more richness and kind of complexity to it. I arrive at something that's really unexpected in the composition. And this is going to be crazy to try and so I'm going for 6 weeks where I have this space at the Bo Bartlett Center at Columbus State University, where they have really high ceilings and big walls for me to complete this. So, but to try and actually finish a painting in 6 weeks is going to be kind of wild. Usually I let them kind of go really slowly at the end and kind of keep poking away at them over the course of months. So I've been working on this painting for 3 years, but now it's finally I'm going to put it all together for real for the first time and try and make it all happen.